Okay, should be live on YouTube, going live on TikTok. And the name of the game is that today I will be finishing out Cider House Rules. I'll be picking up from page 568. Don't be afraid. Rose heard Candy tell her just before the ether began to take her out of her body. I can ride it, she said. Rose meant a bicycle. Homer watched her wiggle her toes. Rose was getting her first feel of the sand. The beach was warm. The tide was coming in. She felt the water around her ankles. No big deal, she murmured. Rose meant the ocean. Homer Wells, adjusting the speculum until he had a perfect view of the cervix, introduced the first dilator until the OS opened like an eye looking back at him. The cervix looked softened and slightly enlarged. It was bathed in a healthy, clear mucus. It was the most breathtaking pink color that Homer had ever seen. Downstairs, he heard the wheelchair careening through the house. There was a wild and nonstop giggling from Baby Rose. Tell him not to get that baby overexcited, Homer said to Candy. So she were his nurse of long standing, and he was used to giving her directions. She was used to following them exactly. He did not let the ruckus, or Candy trying to quiet them down, distract him. He watched the cervix open until it opened wide enough. He chose the curette of the correct size. After the first one, thought Homer Wells, this might get easier. He knew now that he couldn't play God in the worst sense. He could operate on Rose. How could he refuse to help a stranger? How could he refuse anyone? Only God makes that kind of decision. I'll just give them what they want, he thought. An orphan or an abortion. Homer Wells breathed slowly and regularly. The steadiness of his hand surprised him. He did not even blink when he felt the curette make contact. He did not divert his eye from witnessing the miracle. For that night, Candy slept in the extra bed in Angel's room. She wanted to be close by if Rose needed anything. Rose slept like a rock. The gap left by her missing tooth made a small whistling noise. When her lips were parted, it was not at all disturbing. Candy slept quite soundly, too. Angel slept downstairs, sharing the big bed with Wally. He stayed awake quite late, talking. Wally told Angel about the time he first fell in love with Candy. Although Angel had heard the story before, he listened to it more attentively, now that he thought he had fallen in love with Rose. Wally also told Angel that he must never underestimate the darker necessities of the world where his father had grown up. It's the old story, Wally said to Angel. You can get Homer out of St. Cloud's, but you can't get St. Cloud's out of Homer. The thing about being in love, Wally said to Angel, is that you can't force anyone. It's natural to want someone you love to do what you want, what you think might be good for them, but you have to let everything happen to them. You can't interfere with people you love any more than you're supposed to interfere with people you don't know. And that's hard, he added, because you often feel like interfering. You want to be the one who makes the plans. I mean, true, you can't make up a person's feelings. Can't force someone to love you. You can't. Well, you can't really make a connection, a loving connection with someone who doesn't love you back. Unrequited love. Or unrequited romance, whatever you want to call it. Can't force people to stay if all they want to do is window shop. And there are a bunch of window shoppers out there, don't get me wrong. It's hard to want to protect someone else and not be able to, Angel pointed out. You can't protect people, kiddo, Wally said. All you can do is love them. When he fell asleep, Wally felt the movement of the raft on the Irrawaddy. One of his friendly Burmese rescuers was offering to catheterize him. First, he dipped a bamboo shoot in the brown river. Then he wiped it dry on one of the strips of silk that bound up his head basket. Then he spat on it. You want to peace now? The Burmese asked Wally. No, thank you, Wally said in his sleep. No piss now, he said aloud, which made Angel smile before he fell asleep too. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Homer Wells was wide awake. He'd volunteered to have Baby Rose for the night. She'll be up all night anyway, he said. He'd forgotten how much he really enjoyed having a baby to look after. Babies reminded Homer of himself. They were always wanting something in the middle of the night. After he'd given Baby Rose her bottle, the child went back to sleep and left Homer Wells alone again. It was nonetheless a pleasure having the little girl to look at. The black face in the bed beside him was no bigger than his hand, and occasionally her hands would reach up and her fingers would open and close, grasping at something she saw in her sleep. The presence of another breather in the room reminded Homer Wells of the sleeping quarters in St. Cloud's. We had some difficulty imagining the necessary announcement. "Let us be happy for Dr. Larch," Homer said softly. "Dr. Larch has found a family. Night, Dr. Larch." Yeah, he's found a family with the endless ranks of the dead. The family that we will all someday belong to. The family of the peace of oblivion. Everlasting peace. He tried to imagine which one of them would have said it. He imagined it would have been Nurse Angela. So it was her that he sent the letter. Now that Dr. Larch had died, Mrs. Goodall's pleasure at the thought of replacing the old, non-practicing homosexual was less intense. It did stimulate her, however, to imagine replacing him with that young missionary who had antagonized him so. I think Miss Goodall is like one of the most annoying characters. Just because of the homo stuff. Like, what? I think like it's another way of saying closeted homo, but even still, it's just flat out prejudice. Like, why would you care what someone's preference is unless you're dating them? And if you're not dating them, it's none of your damn business anyway. So just buzz off. That's what I want to tell her. Mind your own damn business, lady. Stop getting so worked up with other people's business. It's not your life. Dr. Gingrich saw some faint justice appear on the horizon at the thought of replacing Larch with someone who'd clearly driven the old man crazy. But Dr. Gingrich was not so interested in the outcome of the situation in St. Cloud's as he was fascinated with his secretive study of Mrs. Goodall's mind, which he found such a complex broth of righteous delusion and inspired hatred. Who is the other lady? Was it Mrs. Goodall? No. Nurse Angela, Nurse Edna. I want to say maybe it was Miss Goodall. I don't know. Maybe she just changed. Of course, Dr. Gingrich and the other board members were eager to meet young Dr. Stone. Again, there's just too many characters. I'm sorry. Dr. Gingrich was particularly eager to observe Mrs. Goodall at such a meeting. Mrs. Goodall had developed a tic. Whenever someone provided her with unusual pleasure or displeasure, the right side of her face suffered an involuntary muscular contraction. Dr. Gingrich imagined that upon meeting the missionary doctor, Mrs. Goodall would enter a phase of nearly constant spasm. He could not wait to observe this. "You must stall the board," Homer wrote to Nurse Angela. "Tell them that your efforts to reach Dr. Stone are hampered by the doctor being in transit between two of the mission's hospitals in India. Say Assam's one, say New Delhi is the other. Say you don't expect to be able to communicate with him for a week or more, and that if he is willing to consider the position at St. Cloud's, he couldn't possibly be available before November." Homer Wells hoped that this would allow him time to tell Angel everything, and to be finished with the harvest. Not to convince the board that you are competent midwives, in addition to being good nurses. You'll be able to recognize the patients who will be referred to as a physician. Homer wrote to Nurse Angela. "You must forgive me for needing all this time. So I'll seem more available to the board of trustees if everyone has to wait for me. It takes time to leave Asia." He also requested that they send him the available history of Fuzzy Stone and tell him anything that Larch might have omitted. But Homer could not imagine that St. Larch had left out anything. It was with the shortest possible sentence that Homer told Nurse Angela that he loved Larch, like father, and that they had nothing to fear from Melanie. Well, the feelings were returned, but Dr. Larch. Poor Bob, who had broken her nose and her arm, had plenty to fear from Melanie, however, but Bob wasn't smart enough to be afraid of her. When the cast would come off her arm, and when her nose looked more or less normal again, Melanie and Lorna would cruise the old familiar spots, the Pizza Bar and Bath among them. Bob would have charmless instinct to annoy them again. Melanie would disarm him with her shy smile, one that humbly revealed her bad teeth to him. While Bob turned his oafish attention to Lorna, Melanie snipped off the top half of his ear with her wire cutters, the electrician's common and trusty tool. And Melanie broke several of Bob's ribs and his nose and beat him unconscious with a chair. She had her heart in the right place regarding St. Cloud's, but Melanie was an eye for an eye and a tit for tat girl. Like that's Irving for you. All the action in a few lines, and just like tedious, copious amounts of dialogue and description. My hero, on the color. The touchy word to use around Melanie, who had long thought that Homer Wells was made of hero stuff. Heroin, Lorna? Homer was a hero in Rose Rose's eyes. She spent all Monday in bed in Angel's room. Andy bringing her baby to her from time to time. Angel visiting her with every chance he could get. You're gonna love this room, Angel told her. Playing crazy, Rose told him, but I already love it. It was the day that hurt the harvest. Mr. Rose wouldn't pick, and half the men were sore from falling off the bicycles. Homer Wells, who never would master the terrible machine, had a puffy knee and a bruise between his shoulder blades, size of a melon. He just refused to go up a ladder. He rode the trailers and picked drops all day. When he groaned and complained, he was the only one among them who had actually learned to ride. Black Pan announced that it was a good day for a fast. Mr. Rose, it appeared, was fasting. He sat outside the cider house in the weak sun, wrapped in a blanket from his bed. He sat Indian style, not talking to anyone. Then he put on a pick and strike, Peaches whispered to Muddy. Told Homer that he thought Mr. Rose was on a hunger strike too. Every other kind of strike that he is. We just have to get along without him, Homer told the men. But everyone pussyfooted their way past Mr. Rose, who appeared to have thrown himself in front of the cider house. Or else he planted himself like a tree, Peach said. Black Pan brought him a cup of coffee and some fresh cornbread, but Mr. Rose wouldn't touch any of it. Sometimes he appeared to be gnawing on one of the pacifiers. It was a cool day, and when the faint sun would drip between the clouds, Mr. Rose would draw the blanket over his head. Then he sat cloaked and robed, closed off completely from any of them. You're like an Indian, Peach said. He don't make no treaty. I went to see his daughter, but he informed Homer at the end of the day. And what'd he say to me? He'd always say, just see her. Say he won't touch her. Tell him he can come to the house and see her there, Homer Wells told Muddy. At supper time, Muddy came to the kitchen door alone, and he asked him in and asked him to eat with them. Rose was sitting with them at the table, but Muddy was too nervous to stay. Say he won't come here, Muddy told Homer. Say for her to come to the cider house. Say to tell you they got their own rules. You say you're breaking the rules, Homer. Rose sat so still at the table that she was not even chewing. She wanted to be sure to hear everything Muddy was saying. Angel tried to take her hand, which was cold, but she pulled it away from him and kept both her hands wound up in her napkin in her lap. Muddy, Wally said. You tell him that Rose is staying in my house, and that in my house we follow my rules. Tell him he's welcome to come here any time. He won't do it, Muddy said. You have to go see him, Preacher said. No, you don't, told her. Tell him he sees her here or nowhere, Muddy, Katie said. Yes, ma'am, I brought the bicycles back, Muddy said to Angel. A little banged up. Angel went outside to look at the bicycles, and that's when Muddy hit him the knife. You don't need this, Angel, Muddy told the boy. You give it to Rose. You say I want her to have it, just so she have one. Angel looked at Muddy's knife. It was a bone-handled jackknife, and part of the bone was chipped. It was one of those jackknives where the blade locks in place when you open it so it can't close on your fingers. The blade was almost 6 inches long, which would make it prominent in anyone's pocket. For the years, it had seen a lot of whetstone. The blade was ground down very thin, and the edge was very sharp. Don't you need it, Muddy? Angel asked him. Never knew what to do with it, Muddy confessed. I'd just get in trouble with it. I'll give it to her, Angel said. You tell her her father say he love her, and he just want to see her, Muddy said. Just see, he repeated. Angel considered this message, then he said, I love Rose, you know, Muddy. Sure, I know, Muddy said. I love her too. We all love her. Everyone love Rose. Whatever problem. Mr. Rose just wants to see her. He said, how come you're giving her your knife? So she have one, Muddy repeated. He gave her the knife when they were sitting in his room after supper. It's from Muddy, he told her. I know who it's from, Rose said. I know what knife everyone got, what they all look like. Although it was not switchblade, it made Angel jump to see how quickly she opened the knife using only one hand. Look what Muddy do, she said, laughing. He's been sharpening it to death. He rolled it half away. Closed the knife against her hip. Her long fingers moved the knife around so quickly that Angel didn't notice where she put it. You know a lot about knives? Angel asked her. From my father, she said. He showed me everything. Angel moved and sat on the bed next to her, but Rose regarded him neutrally. I told you, she began patiently. You don't want to have no business with me. I can never tell you nothing about me. You don't want to know about me, believe me. But I love you, Angel pleaded with her. After she kissed him and she allowed him to touch her breast, she said, Angel, love and someone don't always make no difference. There's a little bit too much love happening in this book. You catch my drift? They would benefit from less love making in this book in general. Everyone just, keep to yourself and just ignore everybody else. Don't form relations. Don't have unwanted kids. Just be alone. Be happy being by yourself. That's solid advice for everyone in this novel. Then baby Rose woke up and Rose had to attend to her daughter. You know what I'm naming her? She asked Angel. Candy, Rose said. That's who she is. She's a Candy. We already have a Candy. In the morning on the den side of the harvest, everyone got up early, but no one got up earlier than Rose. Angel, who had more or less been imagining that he was guarding the house all night, noticed that Rose and her daughter had gone. Angel and Homer got in the Jeep and drove out to the Cider house before breakfast. There was nowhere they could go to that morning that Rose hadn't been to ahead of them. Men were up and looking restless. Mr. Rose was already maintaining his stoical sitting position in the grass in front of the Cider house, the blanket completely covering him except for his face. You're too late, Miss Rose said to him. She's long gone. Angel ran and looked in the Cider house, but there was no sign of Rose or her daughter. She gone with her thumb, they say, Rose told Homer and Angel. He made the hitchhiking sign, his bare hand emerging from the blanket only for a second before it went back into hiding. I didn't hurt her, Miss Rose went on. I didn't touch her, Homer, he said. I just love her was all. I just want to see her one more time. Yeah, but I think you loved her the wrong way. You're not supposed to do that to your daughter, Mr. Rose. Assuming, of course, that the claims are true. That's a little bit too much loving, Mr. Rose. Too much. Much too much. Sorry for your troubles, Homer Rose told the man, but Angel ran out to find Muddy. He said to tell you was the nicest, Muddy told the boy. Like I was saying, there's a bit too much love in the novel. He said to tell your dad to be a hero, and that you was the nicest. She didn't say where she was going? She don't know where she's going, Angel, Muddy told him. Just know she gotta go. But she could have stayed with us, Angel said. With me, he added. Oh, she thought about it, Muddy said. You better think about it, too. I have thought about it. I think about it all the time, Angel said angrily. I don't think you old enough to think about it, Angel, Muddy said gently. I've loved her, the boy said. She know, Muddy said. She know you. She know who she is, too, but she also know you don't know who you is yet. Thinking of her and thinking about her would help Angel to know that. He and Candy would drive south along the coast for an hour, and they would drive north for 2. They knew that even Rose would know enough about Maine not to go inland. They knew that the young black woman with a baby in her arms would be quite exotic among the hitchhikers of Maine. She certainly would have less trouble than Melanie getting a ride, and Melanie always got rides. Mr. Rose maintained his almost Buddhist position. He made it through lunch without moving. In the afternoon, he asked Black Panda to bring him some water. The men asked Black Panda. And when the men were through picking that day, he called Muddy over to him. Muddy was frightened. But he approached Mr. Rose and stood at a distance of about 6 feet from him. Where's your knife, Muddy? Mr. Rose asked him. You lose it? I didn't lose it, Muddy told him, but I can't find it, he added. It around, you mean? Mr. Rose asked him. Around somewhere? You don't know where? I don't know where it is, Muddy admitted. Never do you no good anyway, do it? Mr. Rose asked him. Never could use it, Muddy admitted. It was cold and sunless late afternoon, but Muddy was sweating. He held his hands at his sides as if his hands were dead fish. Makes me wonder if Mr. Rose would recognize it, and I don't know, maybe Muddy's just trying to cover for Rose. Where'd you get the knife, Muddy? Mr. Rose asked. What knife? Muddy asked him. Looked like your knife, what I seen of it, said Mr. Rose. Okay, so he has seen it. I gave it to her, Muddy admitted. Thank you for doing that, Muddy, Mr. Rose said. Down with her thumb. I'm glad she got a knife with her. Peaches, Muddy screamed. Go get Homer. He just came out of the cider house and stared at Mr. Rose. I don't even know who Peaches is. He didn't move a muscle. Mr. Rose didn't look at Peaches at all. Black Pan, Muddy screamed, and Peaches went running off to get Homer Wells. Black Pan came out of the cider house. Muddy got down on her knees and peered at Mr. Rose together. You all stay calm, Mr. Rose advised them. You're too late, he told them. I'm not going to catch her now. She had all day to get away, Mr. Rose said proudly. Where should get you? Muddy asked for Mr. Rose, but neither he nor Black Pan dared to poke around under the blanket. They just watched Mr. Rose's eyes and his dry lips. She good with that knife. She better with it than you ever be, Rose said to Muddy. Oh, she good, Muddy said. She almost the best, said Mr. Rose. Who taught her? He asked him. You did, told him. And again, people do not say things in unison like that. IRL is just idiotic writing, in my opinion. That right, said Mr. Rose. That's why she's almost as good as me. Very slowly, without exposing any of himself, keeping himself completely under the blanket except for his face. Mr. Rose rolled over on his side and tucked his knees up to his chest. I'm real tired of sitting up. He told Muddy and Black Pan. I'm getting sleepy. Where'd she get you? Muddy asked him again. I didn't think it would take this long, said Mr. Rose. It'd taken all day. But it felt like it was going to go pretty fast. All the men were standing around him when Homer Wells and Peaches arrived in the Jeep. Mr. Rose had very little to say before it got to him. Breaking the rules too, Homer, Mr. Rose whispered to him. So you know how I feel. I know how you feel, said Homer Wells. Right, said Mr. Rose, grinning. The knife had entered in the upper right quadrant, close to the rib margin. Homer knew that a knife moving in an upward direction would give a substantial liver laceration, which would continue to bleed at a moderate rate for many hours. Mr. Rose might have stopped the bleeding several times and started again. In most cases, a liver stab wound hemorrhages very slowly. Mr. Rose died in Homer's arms before Candy and Angel arrived at the cider house, long after his daughter had made good her escape. Mr. Rose had managed to soak the blade of his own knife in his wound. Last thing he told Homer was that it should be clear to the authorities that he had stabbed himself. If he hadn't been to kill himself, why would he have let himself bleed to death? What wasn't necessarily a mortal wound. My daughter run away, Mr. Rose told all of them. I'm so sorry that I stuck myself. Better say what will happen. Let me hear you say it. He raised his voice to them. That what happened, Muddy said. You'll kill yourself, Peach told him. That would happen, Black Pan said. You hearing this right, Homer? Mr. Rose asked him. That was how Homer reported it. That was how the death of Mr. Rose was received. The way he wanted it, according to the cider house rules. Rose had broken the rules, of course, but everyone at Ocean View knew the rules Mr. Rose had broken with her. At the end of the harvest on a gray morning with a wild wind blowing from the ocean, the overhead bulb that hung in the cider house kitchen blinked twice and burned out. Batter of apple mash on the far wall near the press and grinder. It was cast so somberly in shadows that the dark clots of pomace looked like black leaves that had blown indoors and stuck against the wall in a storm. Men were picking up their few things. Homer Wells was there with the bonus checked. Angel had come with him to say goodbye to Muddy and Peaches and Black Pan and the rest of them. Wally had made some arrangements with Black Pan to be crew boss the following year. Wally had been right about Mr. Rose being the only one of them who could read well and write at all. But he told Angel that he'd always thought the list of rules tacked to the kitchen wall was something to do with the building's electricity. It was always near the light switch, Woody explained. I thought they was instructions about lights. Other men, since they couldn't read it all, never noticed that the list was there. Muddy, you should happen to see her, Angel said when he was saying goodbye. I won't see her, Angel, Muddy told the boy. She long gone. Then they were all long gone. Angel would never see Muddy again either, or Peaches, or any of the rest of them except Black Pan. It wouldn't work out having black pan. That's a boss. As Wally would discover, the man was a cook, not a picker, and the boss had to be in the field with the men. Well, the black pan would gather a fair picking crew together. He was never quite in charge of them. Future years, of course, no one would ever be as in charge of the picking crew at Ocean View as Mr. Rose had been. For a while, Wally would try hiring French Canadians. They were, after all, closer to Maine than the Carolinas. But the French Canadian crews were often ill tempered and alcoholic. Wally would always be trying to get the French Canadians out of jail. One year, Wally would hire a commune, but that crew arrived with too many small children. The pregnant women on the ladders made everyone nervous. They left something cooking all day and started a small fire in the kitchen. And when the men ran the press, they allowed their children to splash about in the vat. Yeah, trust Firestone with your tires. They actually know how to air out tires. There's another shop here. I think I'm going to try to figure out what it's called. I made the mistake of getting my oil change there because it was close to the house, and I'm like, dude, never again, man. $100 for an oil change, and they did not air out my tires properly. How do you run a car place and you do not know how to air up tires? How? Wally would settle on the Jamaicans. They were friendly, nonviolent, and good workers. They brought with them an interesting music and a straightforward but contained passion for beer and for a little marijuana. They knew how to handle the fruit, and they never hurt each other. But after Mr. Rose's last summer at Ocean View, the pickers, whoever they were, would never sit on the cider house roof. It just never occurred to them. No one would ever put up a list of rules again. In future years, the only person who ever sat on the cider house roof was Angel Wells. He did it because he liked the particular view of the ocean, and because he wanted to remember that November day in 1950, after Muddy and the rest of them had left, and his father had turned to him. They were alone at the cider house, and said, "How about sitting on the roof for a while with me?" He knew the whole story. "Another little story?" Angel asked. "I said the whole story," said Homer Wells. Although it was a cold day that November, and the wind of the sea was briny and raw, Mother and son sat on the roof a long time. It was, after all, a long story, and Angel would ask a lot of questions. Candy, who drove by the cider house and saw them sitting up there, was worried about how cold they must be. She didn't interrupt them, she just kept driving. She hoped the truth would keep them warm. She drove to the barn nearest the Apple Mart and got Everett Tapp to help her put the canvas canopy on the Jeep. And she went and got Wally out of the office. "Where are we going?" Wally asked her. She bundled him up in a blanket as if she were taking him to the Arctic Circle. "You must be going north," he said. She didn't answer him. "My father's dock," she told him. Wally knew that Ray Kendall's dock, and everything else belonging to Ray, had been blown over land and sea. He kept quiet. The ugly little car hop restaurant that Bucky Bean had manufactured was closed for the season. They were alone. And he drove the Jeep through the empty parking lot and out to a rocky embankment that served as a seawall against the waves in Heartshaven Harbor. She stopped as near to the ocean's edge as she dared to, near the old pilings of what had been her father's dock, where she and Wally had spent so many evenings so long ago. Then, since this wasn't wheelchair terrain, she carried Wally about 10 yards over the rocks and the sand, sat him down on a relatively smooth and flat shelf of the jagged coastline. She wrapped Wally's legs in a blanket, and then she sat down behind him and straddled him with her legs as a way of keeping them both warm. They sat facing Europe in this position, like riders on a sled about to plunge downhill. "This is fun," Wally said. She stuck her chin over his shoulder, their cheeks were touching. She hugged him around his arms and his chest, and she squeezed his withered hips with her legs. "I love you, Wally," he said, beginning her story. Late November, in the mousing season, the Board of Trustees at St. Cloud's approved the appointment of Dr. F. Stone as obstetrician in residence. The new director, the orphanage. Have you met the zealous missionary in the board's chambers in Portland, the birthplace of the late Wilbur Larch? Dr. Stone, who appeared a little tired from his Asian journey, and what he described as a touch of something dysenteric, made a direct impression on the board. His manner was somber, his hair was graying, coiffed in an almost military fashion. Hindu barbers, he apologized, showing a mild sense of humor, sorry. Actually, Candy had cut his hair. Wells was carelessly shaven, clean but tousled. His dress, both at ease and impatient with strangers in manner, the board thought, of a man with urgent business who was not in the least vain about his appearance. He had at the time. The board also approved of Dr. Stone's medical and religious credentials. The latter, in the estimation of the devout Mrs. Goodall, would give to Dr. Stone's authority in St. Cloud's a balance that she noted had been missing in Dr. Larch. Dr. Gingrich was excited to note the contortions registered on Mrs. Goodall's face during the entire meeting with young Dr. Stone, who did not recognize Gingrich and Goodall from his brief glimpse of them in the off-season Algonquin Hotel. Dr. Gingrich found a comforting familiarity in the young man's face, although he would never associate the glow of a missionary with the sorrowful longing he had seen on the face of the lover. Perhaps Mrs. Goodall's take affected her vision. He did not recognize the young man from the hotel either, or else her mind would never grasp the possibility that a man devoted to children would be a man without a practicing sexual life. Homer Wells, Mrs. Goodall, and Mr. Gingrich were not special enough to remember. The peevish miseries compounded in their expressions were not unique. And the way that Homer looked when he was with Candy was not the way he looked most of the time. In the matter of abortions, Dr. Stone surprised the board by the adamant conviction he held that they should be legalized, and that they intended to work through the proper channels toward that end. However, Dr. Stone assured them as long as abortions were legal, he would rigorously uphold the law. He believed in rules, and in obeying them, he told the board. They liked the hardship and self-sacrifice that they imagined they could witness in the wrinkles around his dark eyes. The fierce Asian sun had blistered his nose and cheeks when he had toiled to save the diuretic children. Actually, he deliberately sat for too long in front of Candy's sun lamp. The religious grounds more comfortable to the board, and to Mrs. Goodall especially. Dr. Stone said that he himself would never perform abortions, even if they were legalized. He just couldn't do it. He replied calmly. If ever it was legal, of course, he would simply refer the unfortunate women to one of those doctors who could and would. It's clear that Dr. Stone found those doctors not to his liking, that despite his loyalty to Dr. Larch, Dr. Stone found that particular practice of Larch's to be an act decidedly against nature. It was in large measure indicative of Dr. Stone's Christian tolerance. That despite his long-standing disagreement with Dr. Larch on the delicate subject, the young missionary was forgiving Larch, far more forgiving than the board by no small portion. I always prayed for him, Dr. Stone said of Larch, his eyes shining. He still prayed for him. It was an emotional moment, perhaps influenced by the aforementioned touch of something dysenteric. The board was probably moved by it. Mrs. Goodall's take went wild. In the matter of Nurse Caroline's socialist views, Dr. Stone assured the board that the young woman's fervor to do the right thing had simply been, in her youth, misguided. He would tell her a few things about the communist guerrilla activity in Burma that would open her eyes. Dr. Stone convinced the board that the older nurses and Mrs. Grogan had a few more years of good service in them. It's all a matter of guidance, Dr. Stone told the board. There was a word that pleased Dr. Gingrich. Dr. Stone opened his hands. They were rather roughly calloused for the hands of a doctor. Mrs. Goodall would observe, thinking it charming how this healer of children must have helped with building the huts or planting the gardens, or whatever other rough work there had been to do over there. When he said guidance, Homer Wells opened his hands the way a minister received a congregation, thought the board. The way a good doctor received the precious head of a newborn child, they thought. It was thrilling, after they had interviewed him, how he blessed them as he was leaving them, and how he salaamed to them. Yasakin, said the missionary doctor. Well, what had he said? I wanted to know. Wally, of course, had taught Homer the correct pronunciation, it being one of the very few Burmese things that Wally had ever heard correctly, although he'd never learned what it meant. Homer Wells translated the phrase for them. Wally had always thought it was someone else's name. It means, Homer told the raptured board, may God watch over your soul, which no man may abuse. Yeah, there is no God and there are no souls. There's just absurdly and ridiculously long books. Okay. I think we're getting close. Like, this is close to the end, I'm sure. I hope so. Very good. Yeah, like 3 pages, I think. There are loud murmurs of approval. Mrs. Biddle said, all that in such short phrase. It's a remarkable language, Dr. Stone told them dreamily. Ya Sakin, he told them again. He got them all to repeat it after him. He was pleased to imagine them later giving this meaningless blessing to each other. It would have pleased him more if he'd ever known what the phrase actually meant. It's the perfect thing for a board of trustees to go around saying to each other, "Freed fish balls." I think I got away with it, Homer told Wally and Candy and Angel when they were eating a last supper in the house at Ocean View. Doesn't surprise me, Wally told his friend. I have every reason to believe that you can get away with anything. Upstairs after supper, Angel watched his father pack the old black doctor's bag and some other bags as well. Don't worry, Pop, Angel told his father. You're going to do just fine. You're going to do just fine, too, Homer told his son. I'm not worried about that. Downstairs, they heard Candy pushing Wally around in the wheelchair. They were playing the game that Wally and Angel often played, the game Wally called flying. Come on, Wally was saying. Angel can make it go faster. Candy was laughing. I'm going as fast as I can, Candy said. Please stop thinking about the furniture, Wally told her. Please look after Wally, Homer said to Angel, and mind your mother, he told his son. Right, said Angel Wells. In the constantly changing weather of Maine, especially on cloudy days, the presence of St. Clouds could be felt in Hart's Rock. With heavy certainty, the air of St. Clouds could be distinguished in the trapped stillness that hovered above the water of Drinkwater Lake. Those water bugs, those water walkers that were nearly a constant there. Even in the fog that rolled over those bright coastal lawns of Hart's Haven well-to-do, sometimes in the storm-coming air that leaden, heart-sinking feeling that was the essence of the air of St. Clouds. Candy, Wally, and Angel would go to St. Clouds for Christmas, the longer of Angel's school vacations. After Angel had his driver's license, he was free to visit his father as often as he liked, which was often. When Homer Wells went to St. Clouds, even though Wally had offered him a car, Homer took the train. Homer knew he wouldn't need a car there, and he wanted to arrive the way that most of the patients did. He wanted to get the feel of it. By late November, there was already snow as the train moved north and inland. By the time the train reached St. Clouds, the blue, cold snow was deeply in the ground and heavily bent the trees. The station master, who hated to leave the television, was shoveling snow off the platform when the train pulled in. The station master thought he recognized Homer Wells, but the stern black doctor's bag and the new beard fooled him. Homer burned his face with the sun lamp. Homer had started the beard because it had hurt to shave. After he burned his face with the sun lamp, and once the beard had grown for a while, he thought the change would be suitable. Didn't the beard know his new name? Dr. Stone, Homer said to the station master, introducing himself. Fuzzy Stone, he said. I used to be an orphan here. Now I'm the new doctor. I thought you were familiar, the station master said, bowing as he shook Homer's hand. Only one other passenger had gotten off the train in St. Clouds. Homer Wells had no difficulty imagining what she wanted. She was a thin young woman in a long muskrat coat with a scarf, and a ski hat pulled almost over her eyes. She hung back on the platform, waiting for Homer to move away from the station master. It was the doctor's bag that had caught her attention. Homer had arranged for the usual louts to tote his heavier luggage. He started up the hill to the orphanage, carrying just the doctor's bag. The young woman followed him. They walked uphill in this fashion, with the woman lagging purposefully behind. They almost reached the girls' division. Then Homer stopped walking and waited for her. Is that the way to the orphanage? The young woman asked him. Right, said Homer Wells. Since she had grown the beard, he tended to over-smile at people. He imagined that the beard made it hard for people to tell whether he was smiling. Are you the doctor? The old woman asked him. Staring at the snow on both her boots and warily at the doctor's bag. Yes, I'm Dr. Stone, he said, taking the woman's arm and leading her toward the hospital entrance of the boys' division. May I help you? He asked her. And so he arrived, as Nurse Edna would say, bringing the Lord's work with him. Nurse Angela threw her arms around his neck and whispered in his ear. Oh, Homer, she whispered. I need you to be back. Call me Fuzzy, he whispered to her, because he knew that Homer Wells, like Rose was long gone. For several days, Nurse Caroline would be shy with him, but he wouldn't need more than a few operations and a few deliveries to convince her that he was the real thing. Dr. Stone, even as a name, would be a fitting successor to Dr. Larch. For wasn't Stone a good, hard feet on the ground, reliable sounding sort of name for a physician? Mrs. Grogan would remark that she had not enjoyed being read aloud to so much since those hard-remembered days of Homer Wells. It was to everyone's relief that Fuzzy Stone would exhibit a few symptoms of his former respiratory difficulties as Homer Wells had exhibited signs of a weak and damaged heart. Candy and Wally Worthington had shown themselves full tilt into apple farming. They threw themselves into it. Wally would serve 2 terms as president of the Maine Horticultural Society. Candy would serve as a term as the director of the New York England Apple Institute. Angel Wells, whom Rose had introduced to love and to imagination, would one day be a novelist. He's got fiction in his blood, Wally would tell Homer Wells. The Candy, a novelist, was also what Homer Wells had become. For a novelist, in Candy's opinion, was also kind of an imposter doctor, but a good doctor nonetheless. Homer, a novelist, isn't a doctor at all, really. Homer never minded giving up his name. It wasn't his actual name to begin with. It was as easy to be a Fuzzy as it was to be a Homer, or easy as far to be a Stone as it was to be anything else. He was tired or plagued with insomnia or both. He would miss Angel, or he would think of Candy. Sometimes he longed to carry Wally into the surf or to fly with him. Some nights Homer imagined he would be caught, or he worried about what he would do. Angel and Nurse Edna were too old for the Lord's work, for all the other work in St. Cloud's. But he would never replace Mrs. Grogan. Sometimes when he was especially tired, he dreamed that abortions were legal. They were safe and available, and therefore he could stop performing them because someone else would do them. Barely that tired. After a while, he would write to Candy, say that he had become a socialist, or at least that he had become sympathetic to socialist views. Candy understood by this confession that Homer was sleeping with Nurse Caroline, which she also understood would be good for them. That is, this new development was good for Homer and for Nurse Caroline, and it was good for Candy too. Jeez Louise, like that guy can get around. Good gosh, man. Seriously, he's had like more girlfriends than Liberace. Like what the Homer Wells saw no end to insights he received nightly in his continuous reading from Jane Eyre and from David Copperfield and Great Expectations. He would smile to remember how he once thought about Dickens was better than Bronte. They both gave such huge entertainment and instruction. What did it matter? He thought. From where comes this childish business of better? If not entertainment. He took continued instruction from Gray's Anatomy. For a while, he lacked one thing. He was about to order it when one came unordered to him. Is it from God? Miss Grogan would say. Station master sent in the message. There was a body at the railroad station addressed to Dr. Stone. It was from the hospital in Bath, which had been Dr. Larch's long-standing source for bodies, the days when he'd ordered them. With some mistake, Homer Wells was sure, but he went to this railroad station to view the body anyway. Spare the station master any unnecessary agitation. It's interesting how the narrator still used the name Homer. Homer stood staring at the cadaver, which had been correctly prepared for such a long time that the station master grew even more anxious. Just as soon you either take it uphill or send it back, the station master said, but Homer Wells waved the fool off. He went to Peace to look at Melanie. She requested this use of her body, wanted to told the pathologist at the Bath Hospital. Melanie had seen a photograph in the Bath paper, together with an article revealing Dr. Stone's appointment in St. Cloud's. The end of her death, which was caused by an electrical accident. Melanie had Lorna to send her body to Dr. Stone in St. Cloud's. Might be of some use to him finally, she told a friend. First, Homer remembered how Melanie had been jealous of Clara. He'd write to Lorna, they would correspond for a while. Lorna would inform him that Melanie was a relatively happy woman at the time of her accident. In Lorna's opinion, something to do with how relaxed Melanie had become was responsible for her electrocuting herself. She was a daydreamer. Lorna would write. Homer knew that all orphans were daydreamers. He was her hero, finally, Lorna would tell him. When he viewed her body, he knew he could never use it for a refresher course. He would send it to Bath for another cadaver. Melanie had been used enough. Should I send it back, doctor? The station master whispered. No, she belongs here, Homer always told him. So he had Melanie brought uphill. It would be essential to keep the sight of her in present form a secret from Mrs. Grogan. What Homer told them all was that Melanie had requested she be buried at St. Cloud's, and so she was, on the hill, under the apple trees where it was tortuously hard to dig her correct hole. The root system of trees were everywhere. Finally, a large and deep enough hole was managed, although it was back-breaking labor. Nurse Caroline said, I don't know who she is, but she sure is difficult. She was always that, said Homer Wells. And she was his girlfriend too, right? And home, like, gosh. Candy, Melanie, Nurse Caroline, like the dude gets around. Here in St. Cloud's, Wilbur Larch had written, we learned to love the difficult. Mrs. Grogan and her Cardinal Newman over Melanie's grave. That her Cardinal Newman over Melanie's grave. And Homer said his own prayer to himself about her. He'd always expected much from Melanie, but she had provided him with more than he'd ever expected. She had truly educated him. He'd shown him the light. She was more sunshine than he ever was, he thought. Let us be happy for Melanie, he said to himself. Melanie has found a family. But chiefly for his education, he would peruse and linger over every word of it, a brief history of St. Cloud's. In this pursuit, he would have had Nurse Angela's and Nurse Edna's and Nurse Grogan's and Nurse Caroline's tireless company. By this pursuit, they would keep Wilbur Larch alive. Not that everything was clear to Homer. Later entries in the brief history of St. Cloud's were marred by shorthand inspirations and the whimsy conveyed to Larch through ether. Sometimes I get that way after drinking enough alcohol. Like I don't see things, but my mind like expands. It's cool. Makes me kind of wish like acid and all that was still legal. Because when I'm like stone cold sober, I don't really. It's hard to just write. It's hard to read. I feel less inspired, basically. That's why a lot of people do hallucinogenics because it promotes creativity. For example, what did Larch mean by rhymes with screams? It seemed uncharacteristically harsh of Larch to have written, "Put the ponies in her mouth." I contributed to that. Could he have thought that? Homer wondered, because Homer never knew how well Dr. Larch had known Mrs. Eames' daughter. As he grew older, Homer Wells, alias Fuzzy Stone, would take special comfort in an unexplained revelation he found in the writings of Wilbur Larch. "Tell Dr. Stone," Dr. Larch wrote. This was his very last entry. These were Wilbur Larch's last words. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Homer's heart. Except for the ether, Homer Wells knew there had been very little that was wrong with the heart of Wilbur Larch. Nurse Edna, who was in love, and Nurse Angela, who wasn't, who had in her wisdom named both Homer Wells and Fuzzy Stone. There's no fault to be found in the hearts of either Dr. Stone or Dr. Larch, who were, if ever there were, princes of Maine, kings of New England. That was the end of the novel. That's probably the most memorable quote from the book. Prince, princes of Maine, kings of New England. And I've only been one time for an interview, I believe, maybe twice. I've never been to Maine. I have been to New England, but not Maine. I think I've only been one time to go to Rhode Island for an interview, basically. And it was cold there, and it kind of sucked. Did not get the job. That was back in the days when companies would actually pay to fly you out for interviews. It wasn't all like virtual and online and fancy like it is nowadays. Okay, so as a special treat for you guys, I will read the notes on thebestnotes.com before wrapping up here. What are my finishing thoughts pertaining to Cider House Rules? I think the book would have been much better without Ocean View in general. Like the entire novel could have just been based around St. Cloud's with like Larch, Melanie, nurses, Angela, and Edna. Um, who else? Homer, Larch, like all of them. You didn't really need to branch out all that much. Like Burma, I really don't think all that was all that relevant to this story, right? It seems to me at least that Irving really struggled with broke. And yeah, just very tedious chapters and amounts of description, just a bunch of description, like hard read, hard and dry. I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult, but what made it difficult was the amount of words. I think it could have been a much better book if it was like made more concise. Okay. Breaking the rules. This is taken from thebestnotes.com. Read these notes because, as I've said, this will be the final episode of Cider House Rules. It just wasn't very popular, man. I mean, look at my live on TikTok. 0 viewers, 42 likes. You might as well be telling me John Irving sucks as a writer. You might as well be telling me that. And I wouldn't fully disagree. I think he just needed a more concise way of putting what he wanted to say. I think his overall tone is that abortions are okay, birth control is okay. Um, I think he has a pessimistic view toward or family planning. I think he's a negative attitude toward that based on his writing. If you were to ask me, I think he feels more like Homer, that it's wrong. I personally feel more like Larch. It's a necessity in this day and age. Okay, these are the notes taken from thebestnotes.com. Please remember to support the show, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow if you're on TikTok. The novel climaxes with Homer performing his first abortion. Rose, impregnated by her father, is in need of an abortion. With Larch dead, Homer realizes that he must do it. He also realizes that if he can do this for Rose, he can do it for anyone. However, Irving makes it clear that Homer does not fully switch to Larch's position. In his interview with the board, Homer, as Fuzzy Stone, comments that if abortions were legal, he would not perform them. Irving shows that no matter what side of the issue you're on, no position is absolute. There are people like Homer that believe abortion is the killing of a human life, at the same time believe in a woman's right to control her body. There are other people who believe abortion is wrong, but in circumstances such as Rose's would not object to an abortion being performed. The abortion issue is complex and is made even more complex when the relationships, circumstances, and feelings of human beings are involved. It is also ironic that the person who seemed to have the least to offer Melanie proved to be the most of use. Homer admits that it is Melanie that really educated him. Larch said that of everything Melanie was not a liar. Melanie's ability to tell the truth despite all her other faults profoundly changes Homer's life. He acts on Melanie's example and breaks the web of deceit he and Candy have spun. Irving ends the Cider House Rules with a lesson that despite the rules that people may live by, despite choices or the lack of choices, it is rules in the heart that counts. Homer and Dr. Larch's words were above all things well-intentioned, driving them to be of use. Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem to me that rules were all that important. I'm looking at Candy. It seemed like one of her rules was that she would wait, and she never did. So she was always breaking her own rules. And Melanie basically lived like you could say she lived by her own rules, but I think she just did not have a code at all. How she lived. And then Homer too. I mean, sleeping around, lying about it. I don't know. I think young Homer is the best Homer when he was like helping out at the orphanage. How do I feel about abortion? I think women should be able to have unfettered access. I've said that before in a Facebook status. I don't think there should be any limit on a woman's ability to get an abortion in the modern day. I believe they should be able to get one sanctioned by this. Well, I don't know if I'd say sanctioned by the state, but I think it should be fully legal in every state. And I think there should be more education about family planning and options available. I think that, let's see, abortion, women should have the right to choose. I don't fully agree that it's the killing of a person. I think humanity begins at conception, basically. Like when you are conceived, when you're born, that is when your life begins, officially. Prior to that, you were what I would call an unborn fetus, which, I mean, it's not a person. Like a person is, yeah, it's not. And I don't know. I say just let the women choose, man. Let the women choose. Um, any final or closing thoughts? Like I've been having sleeping problems, falling asleep on the road and stuff. I got to be very careful about that stuff. I just keep trying to get to bed earlier and then maybe have coffee in the morning and then in the afternoon so I don't get into an accident. It was a problem at my last job. It's a problem still. I just have to be like very careful. I don't like. Part of me is just glad the book is over. 'Cause the book kind of sucked. I'll be real. I've read a bunch of bad books. Like some of the best books I've ever read were like Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye was amazing. Easily one of my favorite books. Bill Gatsby. I read that in high school. I still remember it to this day. 100 Years of Solitude was an amazing book. I read it after graduating. Of course, I did not read it in school. I read it after, and I really enjoyed it. I read Crime and Punishment also after being in school, and I really enjoyed that book. Um, I think if there were any other books that I would maybe recommend that I've actually read that I really enjoyed. Yeah, I'd say those are my favorite books. And none that really like jump out at me as books I really enjoyed. Like those are basically my favorite books. This book, I think I would put it like with the annoying books that my parents have sent me like Togetherness. Just a bit too wordy and just generally bad. I think Irving would have had a better book if it was like half the length. And he just like completely cut out all the Ocean View stuff, all the unnecessary characters from like Hearts Haven and Hearts Harbor or whatever it was called. Hearts Rock. Like just so much baloney he could have just cut out a book and it would have been a much better book, in my opinion. But that is Cider House Rules. I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, please remember to support the show. I've been your host, Stormer Show, signing out and signing off. Sleep tight, have a good night, and happy Halloween. Thanks so much for watching. Tomorrow with more kind of